Christmas tree was still lit when my son said it. We'd had a good dinner, or what I thought was a good dinner. My daughter-in-law Pauline had made her roast. The grandkids had torn through their presents by 7, and I was sitting in the armchair by the window with a second cup of coffee, watching the snow come down on the front yard. My yard. The yard I'd resorted 3 summers ago when the drought killed everything. My son Brendan was washing dishes with Pauline. I wasn't trying to overhear. The kitchen was just 12 feet from where I sat, and the TV wasn't on. He's here every single weekend, Pauline said. Not whispering, not really trying to whisper. I know, Brendan said. It's Christmas Eve and he's already been here since Thursday. I know, Pauline. I'm just saying. A pause. The sound of water running. Your sister has her own place, her own life. Her own life. Why can't he just... What do you want me to say? I want you to say something to him. Her voice dropped, but not enough. Brendan, he's retired. He has money. He could travel. He could do whatever he wants. Why does he have to do it here? There was a long silence. I looked down at my coffee. He helped us with the down payment, Brendan said. I know that. I'm not saying I'm not grateful. I'm saying another pause. I love your dad. I do. But I need my house back. I need my house back. I need Christmas to feel like our Christmas. Not like we're guests in our own home whenever he shows up. I set my cup down on the side table, very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands are starting to shake and you don't want anyone to know. Just talk to him, Pauline said. After the holidays, just tell him maybe he could visit less. Maybe every other weekend. He's not a bad man. He'll understand. Yeah, Brendan said. Yeah, okay. I looked at the tree. One of the ornaments near the bottom was one I'd given them. A little glass cardinal, the kind my late wife Eleanor used to collect. I'd given Brendan a box of her ornaments when he moved in here 5 years ago. He'd cried a little when I handed him the box. I remembered that. I didn't sleep well that night. I should back up. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years in commercial insurance, most of it managing a regional office in Columbus, Ohio. I was not a perfect husband. I was not a perfect father. I worked too much and I knew it. And Eleanor and I had our seasons of difficulty, the way most marriages do. But we made it. We raised 2 kids. We were married for 38 years before she passed. Pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. That was 4 years ago. After she died, the house felt like a place that had been evacuated. I'd walk through it at night and it was just room after room of things that used to mean something. Her reading glasses on the nightstand. Her handwriting on the grocery lists I kept finding tucked in kitchen drawers. I idled around in there for about a year before my daughter Cecily told me I needed to either sell it or find a reason to stay. I sold it. Brendan had just bought a house with Pauline out in Westerville, about 40 minutes from downtown. It was a nice colonial 3 bedrooms, good schools, a finished basement. They'd stretched to afford it, and I knew they had. I know because Brendan had called me twice before the closing. Once to ask if I thought they were overextending themselves, and once to tell me they were coming up about 18,000 short on the down payment and he didn't know what to do. I gave him the 18,000 without thinking twice. That's not me being saintly. It just didn't occur to me to do anything else. He was my son. He'd called me worried in a way that reminded me of when he was 9 years old and convinced he was going to fail his math test. I wired the money the next morning. After I sold my house, I found a rental apartment about 20 minutes from Brendan's place. Quiet building, good light, 2 bedrooms. I set it up the way I wanted. Finally, no compromises, no negotiating over furniture. I got a good couch and a decent TV and a coffee maker that cost more than it should have. I started walking every morning. I took a woodworking class at the rec center on Tuesdays. And I visited Brendan on weekends. Sometimes every weekend. I would pretend I didn't. I told myself I was helping. And I took the grandkids to their soccer games when Brendan was traveling for work. I helped Pauline move her grandmother's dining set out of storage and refinish it. I repainted the garage door last spring when it started looking rough. I brought groceries sometimes. I showed up. That was the problem, I suppose. I showed up. After Christmas Eve, I drove home on Christmas morning. I told Brendan I wanted to let the family have the day. He looked relieved and then felt bad about looking relieved. I could see both things happen on his face in about 3 seconds. I hugged the grandkids. I shook Brendan's hand because that's what we do, the two of us. We were never huggers except at funerals. I wished Pauline a Merry Christmas, and she hugged me tightly and said she was sorry I was leaving early. I drove home and I sat in my apartment and I didn't do much of anything for the rest of the day. I'm not a man who cries easily. Eleanor used to joke that I cried exactly 3 times in our marriage when Brendan was born, when Cecily broke her arm falling off the backyard fence, and at the end of Saving Private Ryan. She wasn't far off. But I sat in my apartment on Christmas night with the TV on and not watched, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the year after Eleanor died. That particular kind of loneliness that's different from being alone. Being alone is just geography. This was something older and heavier than that. I thought about what Pauline had said. He has money. He could travel. He could do whatever he wants. She wasn't wrong. I also thought about the $18,000. Not bitterly, or at least I tried not to. But I thought about it. I opened my laptop and I looked at my accounts. I'm not wealthy by any measure, but I'm comfortable. I have a pension from my company, Social Security, and a decent 401k I've barely touched. Eleanor's life insurance, the proceeds from the house sale sitting in a money market account. I'd been careful all my life, careful and present and available in the ways I knew how to be. I opened a new browser tab and I searched for flights. I wasn't sure where to. I just wanted to see what was out there. January was quiet. I didn't go to Westerville. I told myself I was just giving everyone some space after the holidays. I filled the Tuesdays with woodworking and started taking a Thursday evening Spanish class at the library. Something Eleanor had always wanted us to do together, and we'd never gotten around to it. 67 years old, conjugating verbs in the folding chair next to a woman named Harriet who was 81 and sharper than anyone in the room. I liked it. Brendan called once in January to check in. The conversation lasted about 6 minutes. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. He said good. Neither of us mentioned Christmas. Cecily called more. She lives in Portland with her husband and their teenage son. And she and I have always been easier with each other than Brendan and I are. She's direct in a way that used to frustrate me when she was a teenager, and now I appreciate more than I can say. She asked me straight out in February if something had happened at Christmas. Nothing happened, I said. Dad, I'm fine, Cecily. You haven't been to Brendan's in 2 months. I've been busy. A long pause. Okay, she said. I love you. I love you too. I didn't tell her what I'd heard. I didn't want it to become a family thing, a taking sides thing. I've seen what that does to families to become a family thing, a taking sides thing. I've seen what that does to families. I watched it happen to my own parents and their siblings when I was a kid. One Thanksgiving comment that calcified into a 20-year silence. I wasn't going to be responsible for that. But I also kept thinking about what I wanted my life to look like. Not what it had looked like, not what I'd imagined it would look like after retirement, what I actually wanted. One evening in February, I pulled out a legal pad. I still use legal pads, a habit from 30 years of office work, and I wrote 2 columns. On one side, what I had. On the other, what I wanted. The what I have side had some good things on it. Health, enough money, 2 grandchildren allowed, a son who, whatever else, wasn't a bad man, a daughter across the country who called every week, a woodworking class, a Tuesday morning walk. The what I want side took me longer. I stared at the page for a while. Then I started writing. I wanted to see the Pacific Northwest. Eleanor and I had always talked about it. We drove across the country once in 1991, but we'd gone the southern route and never made it further north than San Francisco. I'd always wanted to see the Oregon coast. I'd always wanted to see Montana. I'd never been to New Mexico. I was 67 years old and I'd spent most of those years inside a radius of 200 miles. I wrote, I want to go somewhere I've never been, alone, and take my time getting there. Then I kept writing. I want to stop organizing my life around people who didn't ask me to. I sat with that sentence for a while. In March, I called my financial advisor. I won't bore anyone with the details, but the conversation went roughly like this. I had significantly more flexibility than I'd been living like I had. I'd been treating my savings like I was still trying to build something, not like a man who'd already built what he was going to build and could now use it. My advisor actually said, Lay, you're 67, what are you saving it for? I didn't have a good answer. That same week, I drove out to Westerville on a Tuesday. Not a weekend, a Tuesday. And I sat down with Brendan at his kitchen table while Pauline was at work and the kids were at school. I told him I wanted to talk about the house. Brendan looked immediately uncomfortable. He thought I was going to ask for the 18,000 back. I could see it in the way he sat forward and put both hands on the table like he was bracing. Relax, I said. I'm not asking for anything. I told him I'd been thinking about making some changes, that I was planning to travel for a while, and that I wanted to put some things in order before I left. I told him I'd consulted with an estate attorney, which I had the week before, and that I was updating some paperwork. Is everything okay? Brendan asked. Health wise? Everything's fine, I said. I just want things organized. I didn't tell him the rest. Not yet. Here's what I did. I updated my will. The specifics are between me and my attorney, but the short version is that I made significant changes to what had been a fairly standard split everything between the kids arrangement. Cecily remained fully provided for. Brendan's portion was restructured, not eliminated, not as punishment, but redirected in ways that reflected my actual wishes rather than an autopilot assumption I'd made years ago. The grandkids each have custodial accounts I set up separately. Those are untouched. Whatever happens between me and my son, my grandchildren didn't do anything wrong, and they won't be the ones who pay for it. I also put together a letter. Not a vengeful letter, not a dramatic letter. I read it back to myself 3 times and I cut anything that sounded like I was trying to make someone feel a certain way. What I kept was this: what I'd heard on Christmas Eve, what I'd thought about since then, what I decided. I thanked Brendan for the years of dinners and holidays and soccer games. I told him I loved him. I told him I was not angry, which was true by the time I finished writing it, even if it hadn't been true at the start. I told him I was leaving for a while, and that while I was gone, I hoped he'd think about the kind of relationship he wanted us to have when I came back. If I came back, I told him that I could be many things: a father, a grandfather, a presence in their lives. But I was not able to be a burden anyone was quietly waiting to be relieved of. I had too many good years left for that. I sealed the envelope. I put Brendan's name on the front in my handwriting, which Eleanor always said looked like a seismograph reading. On the second Tuesday of April, I drove to Westerville one last time. Brendan and Pauline were both at work. I timed it that way. I had a key. I'd had one since they moved in case of emergencies. I let myself in, set the letter on the kitchen table where they'd see it that evening, and then I took the spare key off my keychain and laid it next to the envelope. I looked around the kitchen for a moment. The refinished dining table, the cardinal ornament, still on a shelf near the back door even though Christmas was months past. Pauline kept it out year-round, I realized. I hadn't known that. I left. I drove south first because I'd always meant to spend time in the Smoky Mountains and never had. I took 2 weeks going through Tennessee and North Carolina. I stopped at places I found on no particular plan. A small museum about a Cherokee settlement, a diner in town of about 400 people where I had the best piece of cornbread I've eaten in my life. A stretch of the Blue Ridge Parkway where I pulled over and sat on the hood of my car for an hour watching the fog clear off the ridges. Then I angled west. I'd booked nothing more than a week in advance. This was uncomfortable for the first few days. I'm a man who has made dinner reservations for things that were 3 months away. And then it stopped being uncomfortable and started being something else. Something I didn't have a word for right away. Eventually, I settled on light. I felt light. Texas was bigger than I'd remembered from the one work trip I'd taken there in 1998. New Mexico was something I wasn't prepared for. I stopped in Santa Fe and stayed 4 days when I planned for one, because I couldn't make myself leave. The light there is genuinely different from anywhere I've been. Something about the altitude and the desert air makes the late afternoon look like it's been painted. I walked every morning. I ate green chiller on everything. I started a small carving I'd been thinking about for months, working on it at the table of whatever motel or guest house I was staying in. Just a small piece of juniper I picked up outside Albuquerque. I called Cecily from Santa Fe. I told her where I was. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Dad, good. You're not worried? I've been waiting for you to do something like this for 4 years, she said. I didn't tell her about the letter. She'd find out eventually, or she wouldn't. And that was a conversation for another time. I didn't hear from Brendan for 11 days after I left the letter. On day 12, he called. I was somewhere in southern Utah, pulled off at a rest area, watching the red rock catch the late sun. I let it ring. Not because I was angry. I want to be clear about that. I let it ring because I wasn't ready yet, and for the first time in a long time, I decided that what I was ready for was the thing that mattered. He left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it that night. I listened to it the next morning, parked outside a diner in a small town I've already half forgotten the name of. His voice was careful. The way voices get when someone has been thinking hard about what they want to say and then lost most of it at the moment of actually saying it. He said he'd found the letter. He said he and Pauline had talked. He said, and I could hear him searching for the right words. He said he was sorry I'd felt like a burden. He said that wasn't how it was supposed to be. He said he hoped I was okay. He didn't explain what had happened at Christmas. He didn't directly address what I'd heard. But he said, I miss you, Dad. Call me when you're ready. I sat in the car for a while. The diner's neon sign buzzed. A couple came out the front door and the woman was laughing at something and I watched them get into the truck. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about Brendan at 9 years old with his math test. I thought about the cardinal ornament still on the shelf in April. Then I ordered breakfast and ate it at a corner table by the window with the morning sun coming in, and I kept driving west. I did eventually call him back. Not right away, 3 weeks later, when I was on the Oregon coast. And it was everything I had imagined, and Eleanor would have loved it. The way the ocean there looks nothing like the ocean anywhere else I've seen. Heavy and grey and enormous in a way that makes you feel small in a good way. We talked for almost an hour. It was the longest Brendan and I had talked in years, maybe ever. He told me things I hadn't known he was carrying. I told him things I hadn't said. Pauline got on the phone at one point and said she was sorry, and I could tell she meant it. And I said I knew that, and I meant that too. I'm not going to pretend the call fixed everything. There are things between a father and a son that a single phone call doesn't resolve. And I've lived long enough to know that repair is slower than damage, and that's just how it is. But something shifted. You could hear it in the silences, which were comfortable in a way they hadn't been in a long time. I've been on the road for about 4 months now. I'm sitting on the deck of a small rental house outside Astoria, Oregon, where I've been for the last 2 weeks and will likely stay another two. The house is unremarkable from the outside and beautiful on the inside in the way that places get when they've been lived in, honestly. There are bookshelves along every wall. The kitchen window looks out at a stand of Douglas firs. In the morning, if the fog has lifted, you can see the mouth of the Columbia River from the back. I finished the juniper carving. It's a small thing, fits in the palm of your hand. Just a simple form, a man with his head up, looking at something in the distance. I put it on the windowsill where I can see it when I'm working. I'm not sure what comes next. I've been thinking about Montana for September, before the weather closes in. I've been thinking about whether I might eventually land somewhere new rather than going back to Columbus. I've been thinking about a lot of things that I'd put away for so long I'd forgotten they were there. What I know is this: I'm 67 years old, and I wasted a lot of years making myself small in rooms where I thought I was needed. I don't say that to indict anyone, not Brendan, not Pauline, not even myself. It was a thing I chose each time out of what I believed was love. Maybe it was love, but love that shrinks you isn't a gift to anyone, and a man who disappears a little more every year isn't a father. He's just a habit. I'm not a habit anymore. The fog is coming in off the Pacific. There are two Adirondack chairs on this deck, and I've been sitting in the same one every evening because the angle is better, and I keep thinking I should sit in the other one, and I haven't yet. Maybe tonight? Eleanor would have taken the other chair without thinking twice. She would have had a book and a glass of wine, and she would have said something dry and exactly right about all of this, and I would have laughed, and that would have been enough. She's not here. But I am. That took me a long time to understand as something worth saying out loud. I am here. I am still here. And now that I understand it, I don't plan to stop. I keep thinking about the cardinal ornament. Pauline had left it on the shelf in April, months after Christmas. And I hadn't known that until the last morning I let myself into that house. Such a small thing to notice on your way out the door for good. But that's usually how it goes. The things that matter most are the ones you almost missed. I spent a lot of years believing that showing up was the same as being wanted. I confused the two so completely that by the time I heard Pauline's voice carry through that kitchen, I had to sit alone in my apartment on Christmas night to understand the difference. Being present and being welcome are not the same thing. I had to learn that at 67, which is maybe late, but I've decided late is better than never. What I did after Christmas wasn't revenge. I want to be honest about that because it would be easy to frame it that way, and I don't think it's true. When I updated my way, when I wrote that letter, when I laid my key on the table, I wasn't trying to hurt Brendan. I was trying to stop shrinking. There's a version of a father who absorbs every slight and keeps showing up anyway. And for a long time, I thought that version was the good one, the selfless one. Now, I think it was just the one that required the least courage. The hard thing, the thing that actually takes something out of you, is deciding that your own life matters enough to reorganize around. Not selfishly, not in a way that abandons anyone, but with the clear eyed understanding that a man who disappears slowly into other people's needs isn't generous. He's just absent in a different way. Brendan is not a bad man. I said that in the letter, and I meant it, and I mean it now even more. What happened between us happened because neither of us had the courage to say the true thing out loud. He didn't tell me I was coming too often. I didn't tell him I was lonely. We talked around everything for years while I kept showing up and he kept tolerating it. And we both called that a relationship. It wasn't. It was two people being polite to each other in a way that slowly hollowed out the actual connection. The Oregon coast has a way of making your problems feel accurately sized, not small. I'm not saying the pain wasn't real, but proportionate. You stand at the edge of the Pacific and something in you recalibrates. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about the 31 years I spent in an office. I thought about how times I chose the careful thing over the true thing and what that cost me and whether I was done paying it. I think I'm done. What I know now, sitting on this deck with the fog coming in, is that the quality of a life isn't measured in how much you gave or how little you asked for. It's measured in whether you had the integrity to be honest about what you needed, the clarity to understand what actually mattered, and the will to act on both even when it was inconvenient or frightening or too late by anyone else's measure. I had to lose Eleanor to understand that time moves in one direction. I had to overhear a conversation in my son's kitchen to understand that availability is not the same as love. I had to drive 2,000 miles alone to understand that I was still here, still capable of a life that felt like mine. The juniper carving sits on the windowsill. A small man, head up, looking at something in the distance. I made that. With my own hands. At 67 years old, on the road by myself. That's not nothing.